I'm Zimbabwean, and one of the things that we do in Zimbabwe is that we have interesting names, and we name our children after a lot of things. So if, this was Zimbabwe, and we're here, I can assure you by the end of the occasion, there'll be a child called Shift. So we have names that are interesting. Some of them are called, I remember one that I remember one time, a guy called Try Things, Forget, Never. There are a lot of things there, So I suppose it's an interesting experience when you come in different world and you see, of course, different names that people have. Over Easter, I was in Zambia. I was invited by a former colleague and a good friend whose daughter was getting married, and they had a wedding. In Zambia, they have this thing they call chief guest at a wedding. So you come there and you give this big speech. So I was supposed to go and give this big speech, which I duly obliged and did. But what struck me as I sat there was reflecting that this young couple, their lives have just shifted and changed. And it just got me to think about my own life and what shifted me and what changed me. The pastor who preached there spoke about occasions and dates. And he gave this story and of how our lives can be changed. He spoke about when Pope Benedict XVI became Pope. You all know, remember that Pope, the one who resigned? It was in 19th of April 2005. The Pope was duly, the white smoke came out, the Pope was duly, consecrated, that's the word there? Yes. And after that, they decided, okay, we need to figure out what we call the domain. I had some technology people coming here. They call it an IT domain. Is that the word? Yeah. They wanted a domain for the Pope. And of course, he chose to be Benedict XVI. So they looked for Benedict XVI in the domains, and they found this thing was already owned by someone. On the 23rd of April, a young guy called Rogers Cadenhand wrote on his Twitter account or Facebook page, I can't remember now, where he said, well, I do own the domain Benedict XVI. And if you want me to release it, I have a number of conditions. One of them was I want to spend 2 nights and 3 days in the Vatican. The second one, I want a replica of the papal hat. That hat the popes wear? But the third one was the most striking. He requested for total absolution of a particular day in March 1987. Now, absolution means total forgiveness and repentance of sin. Now, the question that the other two are quite easy, but what left everybody struck was what happened in March 1987. I'm sure we're all wondering, isn't it? What happened in March 1987? But the point of the matter is that we all have our own dates. We all have our own March 1987. Somewhere along there, you're either feeling good or you're already feeling guilty. Because what happened on your March 1987 is something that reflects. For me, as I reflect on these, there are a couple of dates that are important. The first one I think about is I was in primary school, and one day, and just imagine for a moment you are in standard 6 or grade 6. Just go back to your time, and you wake up that morning and you are ready to go to school. And that day your dad is supposed to go on a trip. And you're telling him, okay, I'm going on a trip. He's telling him, I'm going to go on a trip, and you get ready to say, Dad, I'll see you later on when you come back. And then, as you're about to go to school, he says, well, actually, I've said that I'm not going to go on this trip because I'm going to take you to school. That day where there's a sports event, something happening in school, and I'll go with you to school. So I'm like, okay, great. Oh, yes, perfect. So we went to school. Now, he was going to go on this trip with a number of colleagues of his, and in that time, Zimbabwe was at war. So a number of colleagues of his went out and they said, well, since you're going to take your child to school, we'll not wait for you. We will go on the trip. After school, we were playing with a number of other kids, and we saw about 2 police trucks coming. And we were like, okay, what's happening? And we were looking at this place, and we saw them taking coffins out of the trucks. There are 5 of them. And the story began to be narrated that those 5 men, their car had hit a landmine, and they'd all died. What struck me was not about the death of these 5 men, but the reality that my dad could have been one of them. And for that one stroke of moment of taking me to school, he actually had survived. And I always reflect up to now and I think, what could I have been if he had died at that point in time? Who would have looked after us? Would I have finished school? Would I be what I am today? It's a point of reflection. It is something that I always think about. And it shifts how I look at life, how I am appreciative of what I have, how I'm thankful to God for what I am. And I always believe it was a miracle. And there's a greater purpose that all of us were meant to have and fulfill because of that day. I then look ahead and I think of another day, another date, where you wake up one morning, and that time I was working as a senior economist for a public enterprise, and we were going out in the field, and I was doing agricultural work at that time. Somewhere along the line, we sent the driver that we had to go and buy groceries from one of the shops, which was quite far away. And we said, oh, by the way, bring us some newspapers. He said, oh, yeah, we'll do that. So anyway, he went and he came back. I remember he came back around lunchtime when we were sitting there having lunch. And we were all looking at the newspapers and we're like, okay, what are the stories now? We've been away like for almost 5 days or something like that. And we're like, let's look at the newspaper and see what the stories are. So anyway, we opened the newspapers and there were 5 of us, like I said. And we opened the newspapers and I remember on page 5 of the newspaper, there's this big advert from my company or my parastatal. And they were advertising for jobs. And one of the jobs advertised was senior economist. So I'm thinking, okay, is my company hiring another senior economist? And my other colleague was the senior agronomist. His job was also advertised. The third one was a senior land use planner. His job was advertised. So the 3 of us, we sat there and we're looking at each other and say, what has just happened? I mean, you talk about shift happening. I mean, this shift happens when you can't sit properly and you start to fidget and you're trying to figure out what has just happened. Okay, and of course the driver, drivers are very sneaky. He had already seen it and he's looking at us and thinking, okay, let's see what these bwandas are going to do. So we start to figure out what to do. Okay, so we spend the rest of the afternoon just talking, doing nothing, walking around. The sort of thing where you just walk around aimlessly, confused, and you're trying to figure out what to do, and you pace up and down, and then eventually you just said, okay. So, of course, it was too far away to drive back to Harare at that time. So we said we spent the night, a totally sleepless night. We were just feeling also and everything else. Drove back the next morning, got back to Harare, went to the office. I went to our human resource and the head of human resources says, well, I don't know. I was just told to put up these adverts. So went to our boss. He says, well, we're just testing the market. We looked at our jobs and we started looking at them. We opened the newspapers. And I remember the first 2 jobs that I saw, I just applied for them. My colleague did the same thing. And interestingly, I got called for interviews for the 2 jobs. And interestingly, I got both jobs. So I chose the one which was going to be chief economist for the equivalent of Kenya Power here. And I went and worked there. Then I got the other one, which was at with the equivalent of AFC here, which is a finance company. So as it turns out, I went and worked for the electricity company. They paid more at that time. You know, you're in that phase in your life when even a shilling will make you change your job. So they offered more money, so I took it. Great job, I enjoyed it, but I only worked for a month because what happened is my first strategic planning meeting at that place, the CEO told us, if you're not an engineer in this company, don't even dream of being in this job, of being in this company. I looked at him and I went to my tea break and I say, so it means that me as an economist, I can never be CEO like you? He says, you heard me right. I'm like, okay, fine. That very day, when I left that place, I went back to the office, wrote my resignation letter, put it under his door, picked my stuff, and went home. And my dad looked at me and said, are you crazy? You resign just like that? I'm like, the guy is telling me I can't even dream of his job. Why must I give him 1 second of my life more? So I left. But remember, I had another job. So I called those people and I said, is that job still open? And they said, oh yeah, it is actually. So they actually offered me the job. But what was interesting was they didn't offer me the job they'd interviewed me for. They offered me the job which was the boss of the job they'd interviewed me for. So what is the message here? I think the message is, I think people talk about when a door is closed, a window is open. So when you're in that shifting moment, please do look for the windows. Because a lot of us sit still, we freeze, and we never then see the windows, and they pass us by. So anyway, that's how I became a banker. Because I joined a finance company, and the rest is history. I worked through it, then of course went into finance, into banking. And I kind of look back and say, that changed my life and redefined the course of my career to a point where I then became a banker. Another important date is 2 dates. The date my mom died and the date my father died. What I remember is we're coming from the cemetery after burying my dad, and we buried him up country in the village, and we were walking back from the cemetery, and after the burial, and we're talking, and they have all these old men who are wise. And I still remember one of these wise old men said to me, young man, you've inherited trouble. And I looked at the old man, I'm thinking, what is he talking about? What trouble have I inherited? Did my dad do something criminal? Does he owe people money? Is there a problem somewhere? Anyway, and as typical as old men in the villages are, they just say these proverbs and they leave you to wonder. They never explain. So I'm asking around, like a little headless chicken, was there something wrong with my dad? So I go to my aunt. Do you know something about your brother that I don't know? I go to my uncle. Do you know something about your brother? No. What is? Well, this old man just told me you needed trouble. What is the trouble? No one is explaining. But I got to realize that as the eldest, what they meant. Because somehow parents have a veil they provide over you. And you suddenly realize real world reality when they're not there. Because the comfort and the privilege of calling your parent and saying, hey, Dad, there's this issue, just disappears. The privilege of being able to have someone to cry to when things have gone wrong vanishes. There are moments when I really get into trouble and things are really wrong and I'm really down. I still remember one day I got in the car and things were really, really bad. And I just started driving, going to my parents' house. Halfway through, I realized they're dead. I parked my car and cried. In fact, it's the first time actually it hit me that these people are actually gone. So for those with parents, please do treasure them. Because the day they come and that big shift happens, and as that old man says, trouble comes, trust me, you remember every little word that was said. Even the one that you ignored when they're saying it, trust me, it will come back. Somebody once said, the speed of sound between a parent and a child is 40 years. I didn't believe it until that day. It is indeed 40 years. Because I remembered things that had been said when I was a kid in that moment. You grow up. So when we look at all this shift and what has happened, for me, what are the lessons? Lesson number one for me is that people change, but memories don't. A lot of things that I've said here, they feel like yesterday. So we can all change, but memories don't. So please do spend your time creating memories. 2, when you carry your own water, and that's an African proverb, when you carry your own water, you remember every drop of it. Please carry your own water. As you carry on with your life, as things happen, just carry your own water because you remember every drop of it. 3, they say in African folklore, until the lion tells his story, tales of hunting will always favor the hunter. During those moments, do tell your story. Because if somebody else tells your story, they will always favor themselves. So just remember, during the heat of the moment, the pain, the anguish, the struggle, and as you walk through these calamitous waters, that you can make it, and you can make it. It may be hard, it may be difficult, but at the end of the day, you can make it. In conclusion, I just want to say this. There's a song by Kenny Rogers called The Gambler. You remember it? No, I can't even sing. Know when to hold, know when to fold, know when to walk away, know when to run. You don't count your money. When sitting at the table, there'll be time enough to count it. When the dealing is done, just remember this. I thank you.